Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is historian and professor at American University, Allan Lichtman. Professor Lichtman, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Always happy to be with you.
You are the creator of the 13 Keys to the White House. You have correctly predicted past presidents. You predicted this time, though, that Vice President Kamala Harris would win the 2024 election. When you and I spoke in September, I did ask you, after the election, will you come on and can we talk about the results? You said yes. Former President Donald Trump is now President-elect Donald Trump. What went wrong with your keys here?
Yes, unlike the pollsters who didn't see this coming and try to squirm out of it, I've admitted I was wrong. And I have several explanations. I'll give you the deepest one. The keys to the White House tap into the strength and performance of the White House party. They're based on the premise that a pragmatic, rational electorate decides whether or not the White House party deserves 4 more years or not. But we have shattered the pragmatism and rationality of the electorate this time because of the explosion of misinformation. We've always had misinformation, but this has reached an unprecedented degree where it really has broken a pattern that's held for 160 years. It starts with Fox News and other conservative outlets. It goes through conservative podcasters who have tens of millions of viewers. And we have something new here, a 300 billionaire who controls X, formerly Twitter, putting his thumb on the scales and vastly disseminating misinformation. Elon Musk is richer than most of the countries of the world. And there have been reports that his misinformation has been viewed many billions of times. I'm a great fan of the great philosopher Hannah Arendt, and she said, once truth dissolves, once falsehood reigns, then you really cannot have a rational, functioning democracy. And I think that's what happened here. And there's an old saying, lies spread around the world before truth can put its shoes on. And unfortunately, the mainstream media is also now being taken over by the billionaires. Look at the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post. And unfortunately, the media spend 10 times more, 20 times more time on useless polls than they have on explaining the consequences of this election and dealing with the avalanche of misinformation. That is unique. We also had this time an explosion that we've never seen before of some of the darkest trends in American history: misogyny, racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism. And a woman of color was a very convenient target. Donald Trump, reanimated the worst racial slurs against people of color that has been used to repress them throughout our history. That they're dumb, that they're inherently mentally deficient, that they're not up to, good and important jobs in this country, much less being president. We had the demonization of undocumented immigrants as bloodthirsty killers. In fact, studies by the Institute and the National Institute of Justice demonstrates they are the most law-abiding segment of our society, committing crimes well under half the rate of native-born Americans. And there's a good reason for that. They don't want to get involved in the criminal justice system. We could spend an hour on what's happened in this election, but this is just a brief sketch of it.
Professor, I could talk to you about this election for over an hour, but I will talk to you as long as you will allow me. Vice President Kamala Harris did underperform in almost every demographic, while former President Donald Trump overperformed. He also made gains in historically blue areas and with people who are typically voting Democrat. So are you saying the over 70 million people who voted for him aren't rational, they aren't pragmatic, and they only voted for him because they were fooled by disinformation?
Saying about any individual voter, but I am saying we have an unprecedented degree of misinformation about everything related to this election: the economy, immigration, hurricane aid, the war in Ukraine. And the real story is not Donald Trump's gains. He got about the same number of votes that he got in 2020 when he lost. The big story is some 10 to 11 million Biden voters didn't vote in this election. If half of them had voted, the outcome would have been totally different. None of them liked Donald Trump, but they, like everybody else, subject to misinformation. I don't want to vote for Donald Trump, but I don't want to vote for the shambles that the Biden administration has created, even though that shambles is the result of misinformation. We are the strongest economy in the world. We are the envy of the world. But the misinformation suggests, that our economy is, we have record high unemployment, jobs are tanking, the stock market is tanking, real wages are down in the gutter. None of that is true. And none of the things about immigration are true. But these things have an effect. And I think that's what accounted for the 10 to 11 million drop-off Biden voters. That's the real story of this election.
But voter sentiment was different when it came to the economy. It was that prices are high. My everyday goods are higher than they were under the Trump administration. Housing costs are higher. People feel that real sting of inflation. So do you think when you were going through your keys, you underestimated the two economy ones at all?
Well, inflation is just one aspect of the economy. And again, it's total misinformation. People believe inflation is rising. In fact, inflation has gone down from over 9% to just over 2%. The only way you can drive prices down is to drive the economy into a recession. Look at 2022, when we didn't have this degree of misinformation, when you didn't have a 300 billionaire millionaire spreading his misinformation among billions of people. The Democrats overperformed, even though inflation was far worse in 2022 than it is today. I don't discount people's feelings, but that's only a small part of the story.
Do you think Democrats bear any responsibility here? I've had the opportunity to talk to many strategists, Democrats, Republicans alike, Democratic voters, and the sentiment is, hey, we didn't tap into anything. Hey, we need to look inward. Hey, we didn't address the real concerns of the American people. Do you agree with that sort of postmortem?
Postmortems, you can take them and do with them what the great British philosopher David Hume said you should do to works of superstition. Consign them to the flames. Monday morning quarterback. It's sports talk radio for politics without the entertainment. Half of the critics said, oh, Harris lost because she wasn't progressive enough. You heard Bernie Sanders. Others said, oh, Harris lost because she was too radical, too aggressive, didn't move to the middle. But here's the real story. The Democrats indeed bear deep responsibility for what happened here. It's another reason my keys didn't work. We saw the Democrats openly, viciously, right out in public, trashing their elected president and their elected nominee. I've studied our politics since the founding. We have never seen anything like that, and that inevitably tainted any Democratic nominee, particularly given that this occurred right before the convention, giving any Democrat a very short period. And these same Democrats, these same spineless Democrats, I've summarized American politics in one sentence. Republicans have no principles, Democrats have no spine. These same spineless Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and company, who are so responsible for what happened, are now pointing the finger at everyone else but themselves. And yes, until they look in the mirror and realize what they did as spineless Democrats, the party will be in trouble in the future. Absolutely.
You and I talked about that in the moment before Biden dropped out. You said that Democrats' best chance was for Biden to stay in the race. Do you still think that? I mean, I know you said the Monday morning quarterbacking, all of that, but do you think if Biden stayed in the race, we would have the same outcome? What would that look like?
No way to know. That's purely hypothetical, because you can't just change one thing, else would have changed. If he had stayed without the trashing from the Democrats, certainly it might have been different, but nobody knows. Just like nobody knows if she would have done any better, if she was more progressive or less progressive. This after the fact analysis is completely bogus, and as I said, should be burned in the flames.
There was a lot of finger pointing in the past.
My hands are clean on this. You know how critical I was of the Democrats right at the time. You've heard
you were.
This is
Everyone.
something I've come up with after the fact.
No, everyone can go back to our conversation. I believe in July, you were extremely critical of Democrats. You called it like a knife fight or something to that degree. You were very
Correct.
critical of Democrats back then. And you're saying, hey, I didn't get it right this time. But looking back, do you think you misinterpreted any of the keys the night of the election when you were sitting there and you see the way that things were going? Did you wish, hey, I wish I put that key here or this key there?
You know, for months, I get innumerable emails every day of people saying, oh, we know better how to define your keys. We know better how to call your keys. And my answer is, if you want to develop your own prediction system, go right ahead. They never do. But if you're going to use my system, you got to stick to how the keys are defined and how the keys have been answered since I developed the keys going all the way back to 1860 and prospectively going back to my prediction of Reagan's win in 1982. So I don't think the problem was how I called the keys, and particularly after the fact, oh, you should have called this key or that key because we now know the outcome. I think the problem is a systematic change in the American political system that rendered the keys inoperable this time. I don't know if the keys will be operable years from now. Maybe not. Maybe things will get worse in terms of misinformation and the agitation of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, xenophobia. Racism and misogyny run throughout American history. Xenophobia is nothing new. The first anti-immigration act was the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. And the enemy that was, in those days, the French, who were ethnically and racially indistinguishable from the settlers. So xenophobia crosses racial, ethnic lines. African Americans, Hispanics, no less than whites, can be subject to xenophobia as well as misogyny.
I know we have a long way to go until the next presidential election, obviously. But between now and then, are you thinking about, hey, are there guardrails I can put in place to combat against disinformation, against misinformation? What do the keys look like next?
I'm worried about not so much the keys. Look, the keys are not that important. What's really important is our democracy. And if truth dissolves, and if competence gives way to political warfare, if in fact Trump fulfills his promises to use all the powers of the government to go after his so-called political enemies, protected by the Supreme Court decision on immunity, I am extremely worried about the future of our democracy. Look, Trump got 70 some odd million votes. That's just a quarter of the adult population. There are a lot of people out there who I hope are still committed to democracy and still committed to the truth and do everything in their power to restore what is necessary to maintain our democracy. Democracy is precious, but like all precious things, it can be destroyed. Democracy was very rare. The first golden age of democracy was after World War I in the 20th century. By the 1940s, that was cut more in half. Another golden age was the late 20th century. The 21st century, not just here, but throughout the world, has witnessed a precipitous decline in democracy. A very small percentage of the world's peoples today live in a functioning democracy. And I'm very fearful that America, which has this long democratic tradition, is going to follow these trends. And, once democracy is broken, it's very, very difficult to restore it.
I know you said only a quarter of the adult population in this country voted for Trump, but are you saying that those over 70 million people don't respect democracy? Or do you think that they had some serious gripes with this country and where it was headed and they aren't satisfied with the status quo?
Absolutely. I'm not casting any aspersion on any voter. Please keep that in. But they're operating within this unprecedented explosion of misinformation. And if you look at what voters are saying about immigration, about the economy, about hurricane aid, you can see, and it's not their fault, that they are influenced by this pervasive disinformation. I repeat, Elon Musk's disinformation was viewed by billions upon billions of people. He controls one of the most important organizations for information, X, formerly Twitter, and he stands to personally greatly benefit from a Trump administration. When I was a kid, I devoured science fiction. And one of the plots in some of the science fiction books was that a few people became so mega rich that they can control society. We're not far off from that. And it's hit the mainstream media as well. The billionaires are taking that over as well. Look at the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post. Meanwhile, a lot of the mainstream media is struggling. They're closing down operations, they're cutting people. So our ability to combat misinformation is dwindling, while the ability of the billionaires to pervade misinformation is growing. That is a very dangerous sign. You know, there are a lot of theorists of autocracy who say in the modern world, autocracy does not come about through military force. It comes about through the manipulation of information. That's what George Orwell warned us about. You know, that tyrannical society was based upon doublethink. You know, war is peace, hate is love, famine is plenty. We're not there yet, but I sound the warning that we're getting there.
You're sounding the warning. You're a historian. You're saying this is an unprecedented time. But when you look through history, is there any time you can point to and say, hey, I'm seeing some parallels and this is what happened next?
Well, unfortunately, probably the closest parallel would be 1860, when our society was riven by the stain of slavery. We were a laggard in abolishing slavery, contrary to, again, a lot of the misinformation you heard. Most other nations were well ahead of us in abolishing slavery, and it took a war to finally eliminate slavery and reunite the Union. And even that didn't work because we had nearly 100 years of Jim Crow discrimination that didn't even begin to be dismantled until after the Civil Rights Acts and the Voting Rights Acts of the 60s, and still not dismantled. Again, you know, America kind of teeters between two poles. On the one hand, we're a great multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi society, a tolerant, open society. On the other hand, we're a society that demonizes the other, that, you know, believes that the destiny of America has to be, you know, the heirs of the great pioneers. And as Donald Trump himself has said, you know, these others are poisoning the blood of America. You know, sort of what every dictator who wants to scapegoat a group has to say. So, you know, I don't know where the, you know, which of those two elements of America is going to prevail, you know, in our lifetimes.
Professor, before I let you go, I do want to ask a personal question. You've received a little bit of blowback over your prediction. We saw on Twitter you getting a back and forth with Nate Silver. How are you doing post-election? We're about a week out.
I don't mind the back and forth with Nate Silver and other, you know, responsible critics. But I've been doing this for 42 years. You know, I've predicted the two most conservative presidents of our time, Reagan and Trump, both against the verdict of the polls and the conventional wisdom. But I have never come close to the kind of hate that I've been subject this time, both before and amazingly even after the election. The most virulent, scurrilous, violent, threatening hate that's been heaped upon me. I've been swatted. I've been doxxed. There have been attempts to breach the security of my family. The police has been to my house multiple times. The police is alerted. The FBI is alerted. We've secured our home. Anyone who tries it again will be arrested and prosecuted. But all I've ever done is exercise my free speech. What a sad commentary this is. I'm not worried about me, but is this a sign, you know, that our society is going to succumb to hate and violence?
I mean, all you did was predict an election. I'm sorry that that is happening to you. You said you've been doing this for 42 years. Do you think, given all, you know, the hate that you've received the past week, are you going to do it for 46 years? What's the future of the keys next?
You know, as I said, I'm open about it. I was wrong. I'm reevaluating it. We got a lot of time between now and 2020. You can have me on again, and I'll tell you, you know, how I'm reevaluating, but I'm not going to make any snap judgments yet. Thank you very much. I need to go.
Thank you so much, Professor Lichtman. I appreciate it, and I hope you can come back on soon. Professor Lichtman, thank you.
Find me, my dear. And let me say, I'm still doing my live show every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern at Allan Lichtman YouTube, ALLANLICHTMAN YouTube. I do it with my son. We started with nothing. We now have 162,000 subscribers. And you know, I've been teaching for 51 years. I've been dedicated to the search for truth, and I'm not going to abandon that.
Professor Lichtman, thank you so much for the conversation. And I hope you can come back on and comment on the presidency as, you know, news breaks, situations develop, and all of that.